The rain hasn't let up. Day after day it pours. Not in bursts or quick downpours. No, this is different. The skies remain swollen and gray, as if permanently stitched into a blanket of thick, unmoving cloud. The wind whispers and howls in intervals, sweeping through empty streets, swaying tree branches heavy with moisture, and brushing against window panes that haven't seen sunlight in weeks. Puddles have long since become pools. Pools have turned to streams, and streams now mimic rivers that surge through alleyways, meander across parks, and cut through once quiet neighborhoods. Driveways glisten under a constant sheen, sidewalks vanish under inches of murky water, and front lawns squelch with every step, saturated to the roots. The rhythm of the rain has become a constant hum in people's lives, a backdrop to every conversation, every thought, every dream. The usual sounds of daily life, lawnmowers, children playing, birds chirping at dawn, have all faded into memory. In their place, a new soundscape has taken over, the unrelenting patter of raindrops on rooftops, the low gurgle of gutters overflowing, the splashing of tires against flooded roads, and the distant, eerie creaks of tree trunks straining in the softened ground. And people are starting to notice. Not just because their umbrellas are always by the door, or because every walk to the car feels like a voyage across a marshland, but because the rain has stayed far past the point of mere inconvenience. It's lingered too long, pressed down too hard, carved itself into the routines of daily life until normal feels like a distant memory. Plans are cancelled. Commutes are delayed. Farmers stare at their soaked fields. Children look out the window, wondering when the sky will ever turn blue again. Even the wildlife seems uneasy. Birds no longer chirp from treetops. They shelter in silence. Squirrels and foxes, once scurrying across yards and woods, have become ghost-like in their absence. The air feels heavier now, not just with humidity, but with something else, something harder to name. A kind of weight. A stillness. A pause in the natural order of things. People huddle inside with their coffee and news reports, listening to weather alerts that have become almost routine. Schools have remained closed on multiple days, roads are barricaded in places once safe, and residents speak in cautious tones about rising water levels, foundation cracks, and basements beginning to seep. There's an unspoken understanding that something is off, even if no one can quite say what it is. There are no alarms blaring, no single disaster to point to, just the unceasing, saturating, inescapable rain. It feels personal, somehow. Like this region has become the center of something larger, something slower, something more mysterious than a single storm or system. And while meteorologists attempt to explain weather patterns and flash flood warnings roll across screens, the people who live beneath these clouds are beginning to feel like they are part of a moment. A moment that doesn't quite make sense yet. They open their doors each morning and hear the same sound. They glance toward the sky and see the same gray. They look to one another and ask the same question: when will it stop? For now, the rain keeps falling. And so the question lingers in the silence between drops. Is this just another stretch of bad weather, or is it something more? Something waiting to be understood? Now, before we continue, we would like to ask you to consider subscribing and liking the video in order to support us. There's a quiet, almost eerie rhythm to the way the rain continues to fall in this region, as if the sky itself has forgotten what it means to stop. Day after day, hour after hour, the clouds roll in, not dramatically, not like the towering thunderheads of a summer storm, but in that heavy, bloated way that suggests something deeper is amiss. People wake to the same gray tint filtered through their windows, hear the same soft patter of droplets against rooftops, and watch as puddles, once harmless, now form semi-permanent lakes in places where dry ground used to be. It's not just an inconvenience anymore, it's a transformation. A creeping, soaking, unrelenting shift. And the question on everyone's mind is, why? One of the leading theories, though it's not flashy, not wild, not the kind of headline-grabbing speculation that stirs panic, is that the natural water cycle in this region has quietly, gradually become imbalanced. It's the kind of shift that doesn't erupt overnight but instead accumulates, drop by drop, until suddenly, people begin to realize they haven't seen a fully clear day in weeks. But to understand how something as seemingly simple as the water cycle could be responsible for this unceasing deluge, it's worth stepping back, way back, and considering just how delicate this system really is. The water cycle, also known as the hydrological cycle, is often introduced in elementary school science classes with colorful diagrams and simple arrows pointing in loops: evaporation, condensation, precipitation, runoff. It's portrayed as a perfect loop, a balanced, reliable exchange between Earth and atmosphere. Water rises, turns to vapor, forms clouds, falls as rain or snow, and then begins again. That's the story we've all come to accept, maybe even take for granted. But in truth, this cycle isn't locked into a flawless routine. It breathes. It fluctuates. And it depends on an incredibly precise interplay of temperatures, pressures, air currents, solar radiation, and surface conditions across vast swaths of land and ocean. When any piece of that intricate puzzle shifts, just slightly, even, it can throw the entire process out of sync. Imagine a set of gears finely tuned to work together. If one slows, or speeds up, or changes direction even marginally, the rest begin to strain. They resist. They grind. And in the case of this region, that grinding might be taking the form of ceaseless rain, a sign that the gear of precipitation has become stuck in motion, while other processes like evaporation and atmospheric dispersal struggle to catch up. In recent months, meteorological instruments have started to detect anomalies, minor at first, but gradually more pronounced. Humidity levels remain elevated long after a typical storm has passed. The air feels thicker, heavier, more saturated. It's not just that storms are rolling in more frequently, it's that they're hanging around longer, dragging their feet across the landscape. Weather radar imagery reveals an unusual persistence of low-pressure systems that tend to be associated with cloudy skies and rain, stalling over the same general area for days, sometimes weeks, refusing to move on the way they historically have. And this isn't just happening at ground level. Up in the upper atmosphere, high-altitude wind patterns that normally help guide weather systems, like the jet stream, are behaving in ways that have caught scientists' attention. The jet stream acts like a conveyor belt, pushing clouds, storms, and temperature zones from one part of the globe to another. It's responsible for making sure weather doesn't linger too long in one place. But in some recent observations, the jet stream has taken on a sluggish, meandering path, sometimes dipping lower or stalling out over the same area for extended periods. And when that happens, there's nothing left to push rain-heavy systems away. Here on the ground, that translates to an atmosphere that feels stuck. A sky that never seems to clear. Rain that doesn't just visit, it moves in. For the people living under this stagnant system, each day blends into the next with damp familiarity. Sidewalks develop moss. Foliage droops under the weight of constant moisture. Local wildlife, confused by the lack of dry periods, begins to alter its behaviors. Birds call less frequently. Insects scatter in search of shelter. It's not the type of disaster that arrives all at once. It's a slow, soaking unraveling of seasonal normalcy. What's particularly disconcerting is how subtle this disruption is. There's no dramatic breaking point to point toward. No single flood event. No lightning-laced downpour that broke records and made headlines. Instead, the change crept in unnoticed, masquerading as just another rainy week, until it became clear that this week had no end. And that's what makes the water cycle imbalance theory so chilling in its own way. Because it suggests this isn't just a fluke. It isn't a one-time weather anomaly. It could be a sign of something fundamentally altered in the relationship between land, air, and water. Consider the implications of that. The water cycle is essential not just to rainfall patterns, but to agriculture, energy production, drinking water supplies, and ecosystem health. It governs river levels and reservoir capacity. It dictates planting seasons and affects everything from pollination timing to migration routes for animals. A change here, especially one that leads to oversaturation, ripples outward. Fields become waterlogged. Crops fail to thrive in the mud. Fungi and root rot spread underground. Roads degrade as water seeps into their foundations. Everyday life gets slower, messier, heavier. People spend more time indoors. Mold grows behind wallpaper. Foundations shift. Even mental health takes a toll as blue skies vanish behind a curtain of uninterrupted gray. And still, the rain continues. Even without pointing to global-scale climate theories or introducing apocalyptic scenarios, this single explanation, the subtle imbalance in a system we've always trusted to reset itself, carries profound weight. Because if the water cycle can shift like this, gradually, quietly, without anyone noticing until it's too late, then what else might already be out of sync? What else might be shifting beneath our awareness, shaping new normals that we've yet to understand? The signs are all around us. The unbroken rain. The swollen rivers. The groundwater levels rising beyond typical seasonal trends. These aren't the symptoms of just another wet season. These are signs of a system that may have forgotten how to pause, how to take a breath between downpours. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this: the rain shows no sign of letting up. It no longer arrives with ceremony or warning. It's simply there, a part of the backdrop now. A quiet but constant whisper from the sky that something, somewhere, somehow, is off. Whether this is a momentary misalignment, or the beginning of a much longer period of change, only time will tell. But for now, those on the ground have no choice but to wait, to watch, and to wonder if the cycle will ever right itself again. There's something uniquely unsettling about consistency when it comes to nature, especially when that consistency defies what we've always known to be true. The rain, in its relentless uniformity, has created a kind of emotional monotony in this region, a psychological haze that mirrors the gray skies above. And yet, within this sense of dull repetition, there's a deeper story playing out, one that speaks not just to what's happening in the sky, but to how the Earth's surface itself may be influencing this unending cycle of moisture. You see, while we tend to think of the water cycle as something controlled primarily by the atmosphere, it's crucial to understand that the land plays an enormous role in shaping how water moves, how it evaporates, and how it returns. This relationship is subtle, almost symbiotic. Dry, healthy soil absorbs water like a sponge and later gives it back through a process called evapotranspiration, a quiet exchange involving both the ground and the vegetation rooted in it. Plants breathe out water vapor through their leaves, and the soil releases moisture as temperatures rise. But in this region, that natural give-and-take seems to be faltering. With the ground now so saturated from days and weeks of rain, the balance is slipping. Saturated soil reaches a point where it can no longer hold any more water, and at that threshold, two important processes slow dramatically: absorption and evaporation. Instead of soaking in and participating in the cycle, water now sits heavy on the surface, puddling, pooling, and eventually running off. This reduces the amount of moisture returning to the atmosphere, which paradoxically makes the air cling to whatever water vapor it already holds. The cycle begins to choke on its own excess, unable to circulate properly. Water that would typically rise into the sky and disperse with the wind simply lingers. It looms. And it's not just the ground that's changed. The foliage, too, seems overwhelmed. Trees and grasses and shrubs, nature's own weather balancers, are becoming less efficient at participating in evapotranspiration. Their leaves are constantly wet, their roots constantly submerged. Many of these species are adapted to survive short bursts of rain followed by dry spells, not the persistent dampness that now defines their environment. When plants are waterlogged, their biological processes slow. Their leaves may yellow, wilt, or even rot. And in turn, their ability to release moisture back into the air declines. So not only is the ground struggling to breathe, the plants are too. This brings us to the quieter, less visible layer of this phenomenon, the microclimate. In a very real way, regions can begin to develop their own isolated climate behaviors when enough local factors shift in tandem. Microclimates are typically associated with small-scale variations, like a cool, shaded valley or a warm cityscape. But when a water cycle imbalance persists for long enough, an entire area can begin to slip into its own feedback loop. The conditions that sustain the rain are no longer being driven solely by broader atmospheric trends. They're now being reinforced from the ground up. Moisture in the air feeds cloud formation. Cloud cover reduces sunlight. Reduced sunlight keeps temperatures low, which in turn keeps evaporation low. And around it goes. In such an environment, even brief pauses in rainfall don't offer real relief. The sun may try to break through the clouds for an hour or two, but the damage to the cycle has already been done. Temperatures stay subdued. Surfaces remain slick. The humidity never dips far enough to reset the system. And so, as the next low-pressure system edges its way in, perhaps guided by those same sluggish jet streams mentioned earlier, it finds fertile ground for continuation. There's no resistance. No interruption. The air is already primed. The clouds are already thick. The rainfall resonates with barely a flicker of change, as though it never stopped. What makes this especially eerie is how invisible these mechanisms are to the everyday observer. To most, it just feels like rain, ordinary, predictable rain, happening more often than it should. But behind the curtains of water and wind is a system caught in a loop, a rhythm that nature itself seems unable to break. There are no violent signs, no sudden disasters to shock the system back into balance. Just a slow, soggy descent into an alternate weather pattern, one that's growing more deeply rooted with each passing day. And it's not just the current rain that's troubling, it's the implications it has for the future resilience of the land. Soil that remains saturated for too long can lose structure. It can compact, erode, or even begin to leach essential nutrients. This degradation doesn't just affect plant life, it affects how water behaves moving forward. Once compacted, soil becomes even less absorbent. It hardens, resisting new rainfall rather than welcoming it. So each new downpour becomes more likely to cause surface flooding, runoffs, and shallow landslides, rather than contributing positively to the cycle. In essence, the land becomes hostile to the very process that once sustained it. Even the built environment plays into this feedback loop. Urban areas, with their asphalt roads, rooftops, and concrete sidewalks, are already known for their inability to absorb rainfall. But when persistent wetness is added to the equation, infrastructure begins to fail in unexpected ways. Gutters clog, drainage systems back up, and standing water starts to appear in places never meant to hold it. With more water remaining on surfaces for longer, the evaporation dynamics change. Instead of gradual, gentle evaporation, we see a form of water stasis, a scenario where moisture just lingers, either returning to the sky nor draining away. The result is a region where wetness becomes the norm. Not a brief phase. Not a seasonal quirk. But a new baseline. A quiet shift in the way the environment functions. All of it stemming from a single cause that, on paper, sounds simple, a disrupted water cycle. But in practice, this disruption behaves like a slow domino effect. Every drop of rain adds pressure to a system already teetering on imbalance. Every failure of the land or vegetation to respond adds more weight to the clouds. And in that weight, in that lingering haze of mist and drizzle, the signs of a deeper pattern begin to emerge. So here we are, months in, with the sky still heavy, the air still thick, and the ground still unable to dry. And even though there are no headlines screaming catastrophe, no epic images of storms swirling from satellites above, there's a quiet urgency to this story. Because something that should be fluid and self-correcting, the water cycle, is showing signs that it's stuck. Caught. Repeating itself in a loop of moisture and stagnation that no one quite knows how to stop. But as we look deeper into the nature of this relentless rain, this slow, suffocating weather pattern that refuses to lift, it's becoming harder to ignore the bigger backdrop. Because while the ground may be soaked, and the water cycle might be wobbling in delicate imbalance, there's something else at play, something higher, more encompassing. It's in the sky. Not just in the clouds we see, but in the broader stage above them, the atmospheric architecture shaping how weather travels, stalls, or disappears altogether. In recent months, scientists have started paying close attention to an unsettling trend. The atmospheric flow itself seems to be changing. Specifically, They're seeing signs that the jet stream, the powerful, high-altitude river of air that drives much of our weather across continents, is not behaving the way it used to. And in the case of this region, it might be one of the key reasons why the rain just won't stop. For decades, we've depended on the jet stream to keep things moving. It acts like a conveyor belt, shuttling weather systems across the globe at impressive speeds. When functioning normally, it prevents any one system from lingering too long in one place. Storms arrive, deliver their payload, and move on, making room for the next system in line. This rhythm has kept climates relatively predictable for generations. But that rhythm has begun to slip, and that slip may be the very thing pinning this region beneath a curtain of endless rainfall. What experts are observing now is something called jet stream stalling, a phenomenon where that once fluid band of wind begins to twist, buckle, and at times even freeze in place. Instead of clean, eastward movement, the jet stream meanders. It loops south, then north, creating sluggish pockets of weather that just sit, suspended. In those pockets, weather systems lose their momentum. Rainstorms don't pass, they linger. Clouds don't drift, they hover. And in this particular case, what's settled overhead is not a brief shower, but a moisture-rich system that has nowhere to go. The cause of this stalling isn't fully understood, but many researchers are beginning to suspect that a warming Arctic may be playing a major role. As the poles warm faster than the rest of the planet, a process known as Arctic amplification, it reduces the temperature contrast between the cold north and the warmer mid-latitudes. That contrast, historically, has been a major driver of jet stream strength. Think of it like a tug-of-war between cold and warm air. When the contrast is strong, the rope is taut, the flow is fast. But as that contrast weakens, the rope slackens. The jet stream begins to wobble like a loose thread in the sky. And when that wobbly thread drapes over a region like this one, carrying with it a bloated, moisture-laden low-pressure system, the consequences unfold slowly and steadily. Not as a dramatic event, but as a drawn-out saturation of the land and air. The rain falls, not all at once in a torrent, but in a persistent drizzle that feels like it may never end. Each droplet becomes a whisper from above, a message from a jet stream that's no longer rushing forward but circling in place, locked in a kind of atmospheric indecision. This kind of stalling doesn't just lead to excessive rain. It leads to extreme persistence, the type that wears on landscapes and minds alike. Roads stay wet. Fields stay muddy. The air never quite dries. The sunlight, when it does manage to break through, is muted and fleeting. And perhaps most disconcertingly, the weather forecast begins to blur. Predicting change becomes harder. Models disagree. Local forecasters shrug with uncertain eyes. Because what they're seeing, what they're trying to interpret, is a sky frozen in motion, with no clear exit route. And even when the jet stream appears to shift, it often does so sluggishly, hesitantly, nudging systems eastward only slightly, only temporarily, before slipping back into its stalled state. What might have been a brief reprieve in decades past now feels like a tease, one dry day followed by 5 more of mist, drizzle, and soaking rains. The pattern keeps returning, like a song stuck on repeat, sung by clouds too full to be ignored and too stuck to move on. It's tempting to think of weather as random, just something that happens. But in truth, it's like a grand performance directed by forces above our heads, often thousands of miles away. And when that director, the jet stream, loses its timing, the performance begins to drag. The same scene plays again and again. The rain that once felt refreshing begins to feel oppressive. And without that movement, that rhythm, everything down below starts to feel stuck. What's particularly challenging about this situation is that people on the ground can't see the jet stream. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't roll in like a thunderhead or show up as droplets on a windowpane. It's invisible, yet incredibly powerful, an unseen architect of our daily skies. So when it begins to stall, when it stops sweeping weather systems off stage, we don't see the strings being pulled, we only see the effects, the soaked sidewalks, the endless gray, the rain that keeps whispering down day after day. In this case, it may be the jet stream itself that is trapping this region in a loop, looping so wide and so slow that it's essentially tracing circles over the same sky. And until it finds its strength again, until it tightens, straightens, and flows once more, the curtain of rain may not lift. When you begin to sit with the idea of a stalling jet stream, this invisible, serpentine river of wind that shapes the weather of entire continents, it starts to feel almost surreal. It's not a system that can be seen or touched, but its effects permeate everything. And what's eerie is that these effects aren't always dramatic or loud. They're subtle at first, creeping in like background noise. That's the nature of stalled weather. Its power lies in its persistence, not its violence. In the case of this unending rain, the psychological toll of jet stream stalling becomes almost as significant as the physical one. People step outside day after day into a world that feels static, almost paused in time. The same damp sidewalks. The same low-hanging clouds. The same wet windshield every morning. There's a sameness that settles in the bones, a monotony that wears down optimism like a slow drip on stone. While most storms arrive, make their statement, and move on, this kind lingers, whispering a narrative of unease that grows stronger with each gray sunrise. The local environment reacts too, not in explosive ways, but in quiet shifts that accumulate. Gardens begin to rot rather than bloom. Grass turns not just green but waterlogged, squelching underfoot like a sponge. Trees, overwhelmed with constant moisture, drop leaves prematurely or begin to show signs of stress, not from drought, but from suffocation. The air, thick with humidity, refuses to release its grip. Laundry won't dry. Floors feel damp. Even indoors, the presence of the stalled sky above seems to press inward. And all of it traces back to this invisible river above, lazily twisting across the atmosphere. What's fascinating is that this stalling effect doesn't just create one kind of weather, it can trap any system in place. But in this particular scenario, it's a low-pressure zone soaked with Pacific or subtropical moisture that's been caught in the net. Instead of moving eastward as it once would have, it now lingers like an uninvited guest who doesn't notice the awkward silence. But how does something so immense become so sluggish? To truly understand the gravity of jet stream stalling, it helps to think of the atmosphere not as a smooth glass sphere but as a wrinkled, fluid blanket that constantly shifts and folds in on itself. The jet stream rides these folds like a ribbon on the edge of a wave, snaking, darting, adjusting to countless variables. Ocean temperatures, land elevation, air mass interactions. Even wildfires, volcanic eruptions, or large-scale land use changes can subtly shift these patterns. So, when the Arctic warms faster than expected, that imbalance doesn't just warm the North, it throws a wrench into the global machinery. The result isn't just more warmth, but less momentum, less forward drive. And here's the thing, the longer the jet stream stalls, the more momentum it loses. It's a self-perpetuating loop. With fewer temperature gradients to push it, it meanders more. As it meanders more, systems get stuck. As systems get stuck, the weather becomes less dynamic. And as weather stagnates, those gradients continue to flatten. This isn't just a freak occurrence. It may be the sign of a fundamental slowing down of atmospheric motion, a kind of planetary inertia we're only beginning to understand. Now think of this on the local level, on the roads, in the homes, in the conversations overheard at grocery stores and cafes. People don't just complain about the rain. They start to ask different questions. Why does it feel like it hasn't been dry in weeks? Why do the forecasts keep pushing back the break in weather, always just beyond reach? And more quietly, people begin to wonder, is this the new normal? That's the creeping power of a stalled atmosphere. Not just the water on the ground, but the shift in collective mindset. Hope begins to shrink just a little, shrinking with each unchanged sky. And even more curiously, the stalling of the jet stream can have cascading effects on other regions. While this area is drowning in rain, another place might be baking in still, stagnant heat. It's all connected, because when one part of the jet stream slows or curves abnormally, other parts compensate, often in ways that create imbalance elsewhere. So while this region is mired in gray and green, another might be scorched in brown and gold. And both are waiting for the flow above to realign, to restart the rhythm that once kept the planet's breath steady. What makes this even more challenging for meteorologists and climate observers is that stalling doesn't always follow rules. It's not always about where the jet stream is, but about how it moves. It's about amplitude, wavelength, blocking patterns, all words that hint at complexity without giving clear answers. The result is a kind of atmospheric limbo, a space where weather becomes less like a system and more like a setting. One that doesn't change, only deepens. And so the rains keep falling, not with force, but with persistence. The sky remains soft, heavy, and unwavering. And beneath it, this region waits, for a shift in the wind, for a correction in the jet stream's spine, for something invisible to realign and allow the world to move again. Because as long as that high-altitude ribbon remains curled and hesitant, the landscape down below will continue to exist in a kind of suspended animation, not quite in crisis, but never at ease. While many eyes remain focused on the atmosphere, watching the jet stream twist and stall, blaming the heavens for the relentless rain, there's another layer to this story. A layer that, for now, lives mostly in quiet speculation. It's whispered in certain circles, shared on obscure forums, hinted at in late-night radio broadcasts, and buried inside reports that never quite make it to the evening news. And yet, the more this rain continues, the more this idea begins to tickle the back of the mind. What if something beneath the Earth is shifting? Not in a catastrophic, ground-splitting, earthquake kind of way. No. This theory doesn't involve tectonic plates crashing or magma suddenly bursting through the crust. It's more subtle than that, more elusive. A slow, steady change in the magnetism of the planet itself. A magnetic anomaly, centered right beneath this very region, that may be subtly reshaping the behavior of the weather above. Now, at first glance, this might seem far-fetched. But consider this: Earth's magnetic field isn't static. It's alive. It pulses, weakens, shifts, and over time, even flips. In fact, the magnetic North Pole has been migrating at an unusually fast pace in recent decades, sprinting across the Arctic at a rate that's puzzled scientists. So what happens when a localized disturbance, a magnetic hotspot, starts to grow beneath a specific region? One that interferes not with compasses, but with the way charged particles interact in the upper atmosphere? Here's where the theory gains a little traction. The Earth's magnetosphere plays a massive role in shielding the planet from solar winds, cosmic radiation, and more importantly, guiding the flow of ionized particles high above our heads. When that natural shield fluctuates, so do the behaviors of those particles, and consequently, the upper atmosphere itself. We know that solar storms, for example, can disrupt GPS signals, affect radio communications, and even trigger auroras far from the poles. So isn't it at least plausible that a similar shift, coming from within the Earth instead of the Sun, could have an effect on how weather systems behave in a particular region? This speculative magnetic disturbance wouldn't need to be dramatic. It could be a dense pocket of magnetic minerals, slowly rotating or agitating under layers of rock. Maybe even the remnants of an ancient geological event, an asteroid impact from eons ago that left behind a buried scar of magnetic material. One that's now, inexplicably, waking up. Perhaps this concentration is influencing the ionosphere above it, creating a kind of anchoring field, a silent, invisible hand that gently tugs at atmospheric currents, slowing the flow of air, holding systems in place, and yes, making the rain linger. Think of it like a gentle magnet holding on to a weather pattern. It doesn't push or pull with brute force. It simply interferes just enough to throw the balance off. Rain clouds that might have drifted on in a day stay for 3. Systems that should have danced along the coastline begin to stall, spiral, and sit. Over time, this small disruption starts to compound, not just in the sky, but in the soil, the air, the daily rhythm of life. What's especially captivating about this idea is how little we actually know about the interplay between Earth's magnetism and weather. The two are typically studied in separate disciplines. Meteorologists monitor wind, pressure, and temperature. Geophysicists study rocks, magnetic fields, and underground anomalies. But what if there's a quiet link between the two? A gray area where unseen forces overlap and create something entirely unexpected. And as the rain continues, locals start to talk. Not just about the puddles or the mold or the ruined crops, but about the weirdness of it all. Radios sometimes crackle oddly, even when the skies are calm. Migrating birds have been seen circling aimlessly, as if their inner compass is confused. Longtime residents swear the air feels different, not wetter, but charged, as if holding some low hum of electricity. It's not conclusive, not measurable, but it's there, just beneath the surface of conversation. Speculative? Absolutely. But history has often shown us that the world doesn't need to be fully understood to be real. There was a time when lightning was blamed on gods, and tides were misunderstood as sea monsters. So the idea of a magnetic pocket hidden deep beneath the Earth's crust, exerting a quiet influence on the weather above, might seem far-fetched today, but could become tomorrow's revelation. And there's something compelling, even poetic, about the notion that while humanity builds cities and roads and forecasts the 7-day outlook, the planet itself might be humming with a quiet message, a low-frequency song beneath our feet, subtly shifting the skies above. As the rain continues its quiet drumbeat across the rooftops, over empty fields and swollen rivers, there's a growing sense that something about it feels different. Not just inconvenient, or wet, or endless, but strange in a way that doesn't always have words. It's not just the duration, but the texture of the entire experience. And in hushed conversations among the more curious minds, the idea of a hidden magnetic anomaly begins to take on a life of its own. What does it mean to live above a force we cannot see but that may be subtly altering our world? It becomes less about science and more about perception, about the way a region, and its people, begin to feel the presence of something just beneath their feet. People start to notice the little things. Phones glitch in odd, unpredictable ways. GPS systems are slightly off, rerouting drivers along confusing paths. Not enough to raise alarms, but enough to make people talk. And that's where the atmosphere starts to change, not just the literal one above, but the emotional atmosphere. A kind of collective awareness begins to build. Because even when there's no solid proof, human beings are incredibly perceptive. We feel when something is just off. We don't always need instruments or graphs. Sometimes it's the instincts that kick in, the way a dog refuses to walk past a certain patch of road, or how the power flickers ever so briefly at the exact same time every night. It creates an undercurrent of tension. Not fear, necessarily, but a sense of anticipation, as if something is gently coiling beneath the surface of things. And when people start connecting these experiences to the magnetic theory, it gives them a framework, a narrative, a shape to the unexplainable. Meanwhile, those who study the Earth, not the sky, begin to take quiet interest. Not in dramatic ways. You won't see camera crews or massive drilling rigs. But there are small signs. Equipment quietly installed along remote hillsides. Strange vans parked beside fields at odd hours. Ground sensors that hum silently beneath tarps. And when locals approach to ask questions, they're met with polite, vague replies. Just testing seismic resonance. Monitoring soil conductivity. But those who have lived on this land for decades know when something doesn't add up. Because why here? Why now? Why all of a sudden? Even the farmers, who are used to reading the sky with the same ease that others read a newspaper, feel uneasy. The clouds behave differently. The air holds water longer than it used to. Rain used to move in clear waves. It would build, release, move on. Now it hangs, heavy and unmoving, like a thick blanket draped across the sky. Some blame the atmosphere. Others point downward. It's easy to forget just how dynamic the Earth is beneath the surface. Most people think of underground activity only in terms of earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, loud, violent events. But the Earth doesn't always speak in a roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes its movements are slow and ancient, almost undetectable. And in the case of a magnetic anomaly, that's exactly how it would unfold. Quiet. creeping. Not a single moment of change, but a slow accumulation. A gentle skewing of the balance. And as that skew builds, its effects ripple outward. Migratory patterns begin to shift. Not dramatically, but subtly. Birds known to pass through in late spring are nowhere to be seen. Others appear in odd flocks, their paths meandering as if they've lost the map that was once etched into their very bones. Insects, too, seem confused. Swarms gather in unusual places, linger in valleys longer than expected. Even plants, slow, silent observers of the world, begin to show subtle signs. Leaves droop despite ample rain. Flowering cycles are thrown off by weeks. Trees that should be shedding water seem to be absorbing it unnaturally fast. The landscape, in many ways, feels as though it's responding to an influence that can't be seen or touched. The most unnerving part is that nothing seems wrong in the way that disasters usually are. There are no explosions, no collapsing buildings, no sirens. Just a growing strangeness, an ambient sense that something has shifted just a few degrees off normal. Enough to be noticed. Not enough to be understood. And in the midst of it all, the rain continues. Meteorologists offer explanations, of course: stalled systems, moisture from nearby oceans, jet stream interruptions. These aren't wrong. They are likely part of the puzzle. But it doesn't explain the feeling. The weight in the air. The inexplicable disturbances in electronics. The strange hum some swear they hear when everything else is still. It's almost like the land is breathing in a way it hasn't for centuries. Shallow, deep, slow, electric. The magnetic field, if truly disturbed in this way, would not act with the drama of a storm. It would be more like gravity, omnipresent, persistent, shaping the world without drawing attention to itself. And it raises a fascinating question. If we don't fully understand how magnetism shapes our lives, what else might it be doing that we've never thought to measure? There are whispers of ancient lore too. Stories passed down in indigenous communities and old local legends that speak of sleeping rivers of iron, of mountains that hum, of places the animals avoid and where storms linger longer than they should. Perhaps these tales weren't just folklore. Perhaps they were early observations, intuitive recordings of environmental memory that science has simply not caught up with yet. And if this theory proves true, if the rains are being held by an unseen magnetic hand stretching from the core of the earth to the edges of the clouds, then we may be witnessing not just a weather event, but a subtle reawakening. A gentle reminder that even in the age of satellites and smartphones, the earth still has secrets it keeps close. We might not see it. We might not even prove it. But the rain, stubborn and steady, keeps falling, as if it knows something we don't. Just what does this potentially mean for humanity, though? It's a question that refuses to go away, the kind that lingers in the back of your mind like a dripping tap during a sleepless night. Because if the rain really isn't just a weather event, if it's tied to something deeper, something we don't fully understand, a magnetic disturbance, a shift in Earth's natural rhythms, or perhaps a convergence of forces we haven't yet been able to name, then the implications reach far beyond puddles and storm drains. They reach into the very core of what it means to live on this planet, in this time. For the average person, daily life is mostly shaped by systems, schedules, clocks, calendars. We live by routines. We're tethered to digital reminders, economic cycles, cultural expectations. Everything is measured, forecasted, and planned for. But when something as simple, and as relentless, as rain refuses to fit within that framework, something strange begins to happen. Our systems start to fray. And in those frayed edges, there's a quiet exposure. A vulnerability. A rawness we're not used to feeling anymore. This kind of persistent rain doesn't just soak the ground, it soaks into the psyche. It forces people to think. To ask questions. To wonder if the world is changing beneath their feet in a way that satellites and spreadsheets can't quite capture. For a civilization so used to feeling in control, of nature, of time, of outcomes, this kind of phenomenon feels personal. Almost like a message. A wake-up call wrapped in clouds. And it's not just about weather patterns or flood management. It's about our place in the natural order. about whether we've truly understood the land we live on, or merely occupied it. For thousands of years, human beings lived in sync with the land's rhythms. They watched the skies, read the soil, listened to the winds. But now, most of us live inside walls. We walk on pavement. We control the temperature around us with a dial. And in doing so, we've slowly drifted away from the deeper pulse of the planet itself. But this kind of rain, this unrelenting, mood-altering, rhythm-breaking downpour, it forces us to remember. It peels back the illusion of separation. Reminds us that no matter how advanced our cities are, how fast our internet is, or how tall the skyscrapers grow, we are still at the mercy of the earth. We still live within its systems, not above them. And that realization has power. Because if humanity can be humbled, not through fear, but through awe, then maybe, just maybe, we can shift. Not in a sudden, revolutionary kind of way, but in the small, subtle decisions we make every day. The way we treat our environments. The way we talk about nature, not as an opponent or a resource, but as a partner. A co-inhabitant of this strange, spinning rock we call home. It's easy to think of the rain as just an inconvenience. A weather blip. A soggy footnote in an otherwise normal year. But what if it's something more? What if it's a symptom of a planet subtly trying to communicate? Not through thunderclaps or disasters, but through consistency. Through persistence. Through a phenomenon that refuses to be ignored. And on a more psychological level, what does it do to us when the outside world refuses to match our expectations? When no amount of forecasting or planning or preparation can stop the downpour? It reminds us that we are not in control, not fully. And maybe that's not a threat, but a gift. Maybe being reminded of our place within something bigger isn't about powerlessness, but perspective. About reconnecting. Humanity is at a strange crossroads, technologically capable of amazing things, yet spiritually and emotionally distanced from the very world that made us. If this rain, this mysterious and relentless weather event, is a kind of mirror, then what it shows us might not be about the clouds at all. It might be about us. About how we react to uncertainty. How we respond to disruption. How we care, or fail to care, for the fragile systems that sustain life. Because in the end, the question isn't just why is it raining? It's what are we going to do with the rain? Will we just dry off and move on? Or will we let it change us, even just a little? Not through panic or doom, but through reflection. Through humility. Through an honest look at who we are in the grand, wet scheme of things. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. And so, after all this rain, after all these days, weeks, perhaps even months of water falling from the sky with no end in sight, we find ourselves circling back to the beginning. We started with a question. A mystery. A simple yet unsettling observation: the rain won't stop in this region. Not a passing storm, not a seasonal oddity, but a drawn-out, unrelenting presence. A natural rhythm that refuses to let up. It began as weather, but somewhere along the way, it became something more. It became a conversation. A whisper. A riddle carried on the wind, waiting to be unraveled. We've explored one potential reason: a deep shift in oceanic and atmospheric circulation patterns. That idea rooted us in the real, the measurable, the scientifically plausible. Changes in the jet stream, ocean surface temperatures, atmospheric pressure differentials, all complex pieces of a puzzle that, when arranged just so, could explain how a region might find itself caught in an unshakable pattern of rain. It reminded us that Earth is a dynamic system, and sometimes, that system falls out of step in ways that reverberate across entire continents. But we didn't stop there. We dove deeper, venturing into the more speculative. The magnetic field, that unseen shield which quietly protects all life on Earth, became a possible culprit. Not in a catastrophic, apocalyptic sense, but as a gentle, persistent force. A shift not easily seen, not instantly proven, but one that could subtly alter how our planet breathes and moves. We looked at the possibility that fluctuations in that magnetic cocoon might be influencing everything from atmospheric moisture to the alignment of storm systems. And in doing so, we opened a door to questions bigger than any weather map can answer. From there, we let our minds wander further still, to the speculative edge, to the curious, to the ideas that don't have to be fully real to make us feel something real. The suggestion that perhaps, just perhaps, this unending rain isn't just meteorological or geophysical, but a kind of planetary reaction. A subtle recalibration. A natural response to imbalance. A semi-conscious reset by a living earth. A whisper from the soil. A nudge from the clouds. A collective exhale from a world that has, for so long, absorbed our noise, our haste, our extraction without pause. The idea might not fit cleanly into textbooks, but it taps into something ancient, a sense that nature doesn't just react, it remembers. And when we asked what all of this might mean for humanity, that's when it really hit home. Because the rain, persistent, disruptive, and beyond our control, is, in many ways, a metaphor for this moment in time. It reminds us that despite all our progress, we are still guests on this earth, not its masters. It highlights how fragile our systems are, how tightly wound our schedules have become, how dependent we are on things going exactly as planned. And yet, when they don't, when nature does something unexpected, something inconvenient, it also offers us something rare, perspective. In this rain, we are reminded that we are still part of something larger, something ancient, something wild. It pulls us away from the screen, from the spreadsheet, from the endless scroll, and forces us to feel again. To listen, to wonder, and maybe even to remember who we are beneath the layers of modern life, living beings on a living planet, subject to forces we don't fully understand, and likely never will. We've wandered through science and speculation, touched on magnetism and metaphors, dipped our feet into ocean currents and philosophical currents alike. And through it all, one thing has become clear: the rain isn't just a nuisance. It's a teacher. It's a mirror. It's a force that, whether driven by global patterns or planetary intention, holds up a truth we so often forget: we are not separate from this world. We are a part of it, bound to its cycles, dependent on its balance, humbled by its unpredictability. So, what do we take from all this? Maybe it's the realization that understanding isn't always about having answers. Sometimes it's about asking better questions. Maybe it's the invitation to reconnect, with nature, with time, with each other. Or maybe it's just this, a chance to pause, to breathe, to stand in the rain and feel something ancient stir inside us. A memory. A belonging. A reminder that we are still, despite all the layers we've added, human. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want more thought-provoking content like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out and lets us know you want more stories like this. Thanks for watching.